Top Med Talk.
Desiree Chappell here with Top Med Talk. Top Med Talk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, or Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. Now, in response to the COVID-19 crisis, we have taken action. And in an effort to maintain social distancing as best we can, we have moved to virtual online conferencing. Please join us for our next conference coming up on September 11th through the 13th. It was originally our EBPOM Chicago meeting. It's our EBPOM USA meeting. You can find more information at ebpom.org. That's ebpom.org. Thanks for listening. Well, hello and welcome to Top Med Talk. I'm Desiree Chappell, your host, and I'm joined by my fabulous co-host in London, England, Monty Mythen. Hello, Monty. How are you?
I'm doing great, Desiree.
Good.
Yeah.
Long time no see, Monty. I don't even know how to say that because I see you on Zoom all the time. But
yeah, we have very intense around the peak times of COVID-19. You know, we were doing at least one, sometimes 2 or 3 podcasts per day. Yeah. We then got into our EBPOM London meeting, which was a huge success, where we had about 8,000 delegates turned up over a few days, and had treated ourselves to a little bit of stavation, a few days getting back to a reality of as life as it should be.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know if life can even be close to what it was before.
Yeah, I suppose the new life in under the enormous shadow of COVID-19. Yeah, so, we know where we should be at the moment.
Yeah.
And we're not there. We're sitting at home pretending to be in different places using green screens, lighting and backdrops.
I'm not pretending to be anywhere else. I would like to be in San Diego, but I'm in Louisville, Kentucky.
Yeah, and I'm in London, and I'm not. I've got a beautiful picture of a sunny West Central London behind me. Those people who get to see the video, but it's not reality. I'm sitting in a bedroom in West London, and it's grey and cloudy.
It was really hot. Well, so we should be in San Diego at the American Association of Nurse Anesthetists 2020 Annual Congress. And obviously, because of COVID, did not happen like every other meeting, conference, Congress this past year. And, the AANA pivoted to a virtual meeting, and we thought we would do the same for them. Last year, it was amazing. We were in Chicago. Monty, we had some fabulous conversations.
Brilliant conversations. Now, we should probably, that series is there for people to go back and listen to. A wonderful, wonderful set of conversations. I know we're going to have another wonderful set now, because it's always challenging not to be in the room, but because of the technology we're using, although many people will just be listening to this, we're having the face-to-face experience. Now, I think it's important to remind people, because CRNA and AANA, which we'll say a lot in this series of podcasts, you should probably just re-explain again quickly. You're a CRNA, Desiree.
I am. I'm a certified registered nurse anesthetist, or for other places in the world, anesthetist. And I'm a nurse trained to do anesthesia. And our professional organization is the American Association of Nurse Anesthetists.
So CRNA person,
yes.
AANA, as it trips off our tongue, organization that brings everyone together.
Yeah,
cool.
That's correct. And the AANA was so gracious to partner with Top Med Talk last year and brought us to Chicago to do those conversations, and we wanted to do that again this year. So that's why we are coming to you virtually to be able to do this and have conversations with CRNAs about the amazing work that these anesthesia providers do on a daily basis on the front lines.
And looking at the schedule that we've been, so is it schedule or schedule? We do that one the whole time.
Here,
schedule, okay, whatever. I've looked at the list of stuff that has been teed up and all the wonderful people. Last year, if people look back, there were some really tantalizing subject areas that came through, things we wouldn't necessarily have thought of. And the same thing's happening this year, like the one we're just about to do, immediately catches your eye.
Yeah, absolutely. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce from the AANA 2020 Virtual Annual Congress. He presented there on a very important topic about ketamine infusion centers, and the title was From Inception to Infusion, and we have Tracy Young with us. Tracy, tell us, where are you coming to us from?
I am in Lafayette, Louisiana. The heat, the humidity is not quite the same as San Diego, and yesterday when For some reason, I still got my flight notifications on my calendar yesterday from American Airlines for my flights to San Diego, and it kind of broke my heart.
I know. It's kind of like a stab right here, isn't it? Like kind of salt in the wound when you get those. I've had that happen. It's a bummer. You know, Tracey, it's funny because Monty has been talking about the heat wave that's happening in London. And so I'd like maybe for you guys to compare the weather there. I know this isn't what we're supposed to be talking about. I always think it's interesting, though. So tell us, what is hot for you guys in level of humidity?
So in South Louisiana, humidity levels this time of year is consistently above 90%. So think of a steam shower when you walk outside. And you couple that with mid-90 degree temperatures, and it's pretty oppressive. It is it's a far cry from 72 degrees in San Diego.
That's true. Or Monty in London.
Yeah. So Tracey, I used to live in North Carolina, so I'm kind of familiar with the summer being winter from the perspective of occasionally it being like 100 and 100, if you see what I mean, yeah. from 100 degrees and 100% humidity, if such a thing happens. I think that's called rain. But here we get really, really stressed if we get to 85 and 85, if you see what I mean. So that's kind of like a crazy hot. It's on national news if we do 85 degrees Fahrenheit and 85% humidity. We hit that last week.
Yeah. So sorry to Tracey for that aside, but I thought that it's just interesting to perspective-wise. Well, Tracey, coming to us from Lafayette, Louisiana. That's great. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your practice, and what you're doing there in Louisiana?
So I've been a CRNA for going on 20 years. I think at the end of this year, it'll be 20 years.
Congrats.
And my perspective was I entered practice for about 3 years, and I was offered an opportunity to respond to a hospital that needed anesthesia services. So basically, they asked me to give them a proposal. And it was around 2003. I said yes, and I did. And it was accepted on the spot. And I realized all of a sudden I was no longer just a practitioner. I was in business. And that kind of started my evolution over the past 17 years to where I am now. And my real job is CEO of YPS Anesthesia. YPS is the name of the company that I founded to start that one hospital agreement to staff their anesthesia department. And since then, we're now in 67 facilities in 7 states with about 450 CRNAs and anesthesiologists that work for us. So as CEO, I oversee the operations. I oversee the operations team. I have a COO and a fairly large team of recruiters, schedulers, credentialers. And then on the finance side, I oversee all the billing, collections, finance, accounting, those types of activities as well. And somehow or another, that morphed into a side business of ketamine clinics as well. So I think that's more of what we're here to talk about today. But it's, people have life plans. And for me, I find that life just kind of takes you where it does.
Absolutely. The universe always has its own plan.
Trace, can I clarify? Congratulations first.
Yes.
Well done. It's very hard building anything and harder to get it to stick. Those in the UK would be less familiar. We're becoming much more familiar now with non-physician anesthesia providers. It took us a long time to get there. But for many of those practices you're referring to, are they CRNA only practices or are they mixed?
That's a great question, Monty. It's about 80% of them are CRNA only. And about 20% are mixed, what we call here anesthesia care team models, where we have physician anesthesiologists and CRNAs working either side by side, collaboratively, or under direction of the anesthesiologist. And the United States is very unique. We have federal kind of rules that guide our practice, and each state has a set of rules, and each hospital has sets of rules. And to add to some of that complexity, we have rural hospitals under our purview. We have community hospitals. We have tertiary care centers, ambulatory surgery centers, physician-owned hospitals. We have single specialty centers of excellence. For example, we have a heart hospital where all we do is open hearts. We have women's and children's hospitals where we just focus on the needs of women and children. So you add in all those complexities, and you get an interesting environment for practice.
Yeah, wow, that's outstanding. That's a lot of hard work too, for sure. Did you ever think that you would be going into business and doing this type of work at all? I mean, did you plan, do you have an MBA or anything like that?
So I do have an MBA. I got my MBA in healthcare with a healthcare focus from George Washington University in 2008, after I was kind of already in business. But an entrepreneurial spirit is something that a lot of people have, right? And you just kind of know it if you have it. I remember as a kid asking my dad, like, okay, explain to me, what do you do? It's like, okay, so you own your own business. How does that work? You kind of ask those questions, and it plants seeds, if you will. And again, you never really know how things will go in life. You just kind of get swept up. And there's a great CRNA colleague of mine who says that, his philosophy is, his plan is to always try and do the next right thing. And I'm like, that is so simple, but it is so correct. And, you make these 3-year plans, 5-year plans, but in the grand scheme of things, you just need to do the next right thing, and things will take care of themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard that one before. Monty says that a lot. You do. That it is that entrepreneurial spirit, but if you're doing it for the right reasons, you're going to be successful.
Yeah, tell me it's hard, and then just do the right thing.
Yeah,
it'll work out. Exactly. So that's going to be ketamine clinics next.
Yeah,
is it? So long-term, fascinating subject, and lots of chatter about the additional ways of using ketamine more effectively. What's happening?
So from my perspective, this is about a 4-year journey. About 4 years ago, we had a family friend who was dealing with depression and mentioned that they were booking flights back and forth to Atlanta to receive ketamine infusions for depression. And it seems like we've been talking about ketamine so much lately that it's kind of always kind of been there for us. But there was a period of time where ketamine kind of almost went away in the field of anesthesia, and it just became really unpopular. It wasn't really dosed the way it is currently. And when I trained and in my practice, it wasn't really part of my practice. But when I heard this, it's about, flying to Atlanta to get infusions of ketamine for depression. I was intrigued, started doing some more research, and the research was already there. Some of the initial studies weren't terribly large, right? They didn't have really large subject populations, but they were very, very promising. So started looking into some of the research of it. And of course, having that entrepreneurial spirit, my first thought is, why can't we do this here? Why do people we know have to fly to Atlanta, Georgia to get this done? And that thought to being open lasted about a year. So we've been open about 3 years, doing ketamine infusions for a wide range of issues. But it's that year was partly spent on research, partly spent on regulatory issues. It was not nearly as accepted as it is now. I remember going to psychiatrist's office, primary care physicians, trying to talk to them about ketamine and how it could potentially help some of their patients that are more difficult to be fixed with common medicines that they're on. And they thought it was kind of voodoo medicine, and it's amazing. Within 3 years now, it's so much more accepted in the medical community.
So Tracey, just to echo that, we always have our disclaimers on Top Med Talk, like always, that we're not taking a side or promoting or anything of this. We're giving our voice to people, but we obviously work in this field and we do our homework. And the one thing that's definitely there is the fact that there's an enormous amount of literature that you can find in the mainstream peer-reviewed journals about this issue now. So if people are thinking, is this voodoo? Is this Pirelli's miracle elixir? You can at least go to PubMed, for example, and look up ketamine therapy, and you take a few weeks off to read what's there. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong, but there's no shortage of mainstream evidence to inform your views. Is that a fair comment?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's pretty prolific to think about in such a short period of time how much literature there is. And it spans the wide gamut. It's not just ketamine for chronic pain. It's not just ketamine for depression. There's a lot of studies out there that you can go and form your own opinions on.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. So tell us a little bit. I mean, I think that a lot of us as providers probably, understand ketamine, and maybe we should just say for the record, what is ketamine, what type of drug is it, and how is it traditionally used?
Perfect. So ketamine is actually considered an anesthetic in the United States. That's what it's labeled for, and that's what it's classified as from the Federal Drug Administration in the U.S. It is a scheduled drug. It's a Schedule 3, which means it's regulated by the DEA. It was first synthesized in 1962 by a scientist named Calvin Stevens, and it wasn't something that he found by accident. He was purposely looking for this compound to see how it would react and how humans would react to it, because it's based off the phencyclidine compound, which has been around since the 1920s. The problem with phencyclidine is it caused pretty severe hallucinations, and the experience with the phencyclidine was not terribly well tolerated by people in general. So the scientist was looking for something that was a similar derivative, but we get some of the good effects of it, i.e. pain relief, analgesia, some of the anesthesia and amnesia, all the stuff that we look for when we're anesthetizing a patient, without some of the negative side effects. So he came across and he founded the chemical molecule of ketamine and began testing it in humans at that time.
Oh, yeah. And then talk to us about, so it kind of, like you said, it fell out of fashion. We started using it. You see a lot more in multimodal pain management pathways that people are developing protocols intraoperatively, and a little bit postoperatively people are using it. Talk to us about use of ketamine outside the OR in treatment of different diseases.
Part of the reason ketamine fell out of fashion in anesthesia is we were really dosing it very high in our patients 15, 20 years ago, and they were getting a lot of side effects. Now we're doing a lot more microdosing and multimodal anesthesia, and some of the patient experiences have just been amazing when they wake up. Pain control feels good, and they have almost like a feeling of euphoria, so they feel good. That's kind of tied in somewhat to what we're seeing in infusion centers. We're doing smaller doses. We call it sub-anesthetic doses is what we call it, because we're not really anesthetizing patients through these infusions, or at least at our clinic, we're not. And there's a lot of studies out there with higher doses of ketamine, lower doses of ketamine. From our standpoint, we have two treatment goals: give our patients the best chance of success with the highest degree of potential safety. So we're on the lower side typically of what we see as far as dose ranges of what we're giving the patients. And we're treating everything from treatment-resistant depression. So these are patients that have tried multiple antidepressants that have not worked. We've had a lot of patients that have gone on and tried transcranial magnets, ECT therapy, lots of other therapies before they come to us, typically before we start infusing them with ketamine for their depression. We're also treating PTSD disorders. We're treating certain pain issues such as chronic migraines, neuropathic pain. There's several different things that we're seeing. In our clinic, our primary patients, though, are typically treatment-resistant depression, and we're seeing amazing results with those patients as well.
Tracy, we've all learnt at school about ketamine. We've talked about the structure of it, the pharmacology over the years. And one of the things we learnt is, it was a designer drug, as you say, and it's got different isomers. Are our industry colleagues, the pharmacists, getting re-engaged to try and see us urge us towards one? This is not a loaded, I don't need the answer to this. It sounds like I'm teeing up some sort of advert or something, but this is completely out of the blue. You'd think that now people are back into it. They'd go back to the chemistry and say, could I tweak it one way? Can I tweak it one way? Can I up one benefit, down a downside?
Absolutely. And I don't know this for a fact, but my assumption would be that with the amount of studies that are coming out on how well ketamine is working and all the different mechanisms of action of how it's working, that there's probably a large number of scientists that are looking for similar compounds that can be a little more targeted and a little more specific than ketamine is. And we're seeing that already. The FDA just approved an isomer of ketamine called S-ketamine. The trade name is Spravato in the United States, and it's administered intranasally, and it is listed as an antidepressant drug. So it's already starting to happen here, but I think in the world of antidepressants, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. If ketamine is seeing some of the literature showing greater than 80% success in patients who have tried nearly everything else, that's got to spark a lot of interest in scientists and drug manufacturers to try and figure out how they can isolate certain compounds better to treat this disease.
It's really, getting interesting, the story.
Yeah. Tracey, I'm really curious. How does this actually work for depression? Because the way I see it and the way I've used ketamine, like you said, you get this euphoric feeling, but that's, transient on the small doses that I give in the OR, and it's gone by the time they get up to their room or their home. So, how does it really work for patients?
That's the million-dollar question. And the answer is, if we look back at how ketamine works, we're going to see that ketamine is unlike pretty much anything we use in modern pharmacology. Ketamine is what's considered a dirty drug. Ketamine works on 20, 30 different types of mechanisms of actions of how inside of our human bodies. All of modern science has been really focused on finding clean drugs that have a high degree of specificity and a high degree of affinity just for one type of, whether it be a neurotransmitter. And ketamine is just completely the opposite of that. So there's so many effects happening that it's somewhat poorly understood. There's a lot of hypothesis on how ketamine works. And part of it is through a really complex mechanism of action that patients on ketamine get a glutamate surge. And glutamate is a neurotransmitter. So part of the hypothesis is that it's this glutamate surge that's causing the antidepressant effects from ketamine. But what's interesting is these antidepressant effects sometimes are lasting for months and months after the infusions of ketamine. So the question is, if you get an instant glutamate surge, why is it continuing to last so long? And they've done a lot of histology and a lot of bigger dive into this, and they're actually finding some morphogenesis in the synaptic cleft to making some of these receptors more sensitive to glutamate that we naturally have in our body anyway. So it's actually kind of changing the shape in the synaptic cleft, making it more sensitive to these neurotransmitters that we have. And then, look, there was a great article that came out in 2018 in the Science magazine out of China. And they looked at rats that were given ketamine versus rats that were not given ketamine. There's a center of the brain called the lateral habenula. The lateral habenula is basically the opposite of our pleasure center of the brain. What I mean by that is when the lateral habenula is firing and you're getting a lot of stimulation of it, it makes us depressed. It makes us sad. It makes us have more lethargy, less energy. And what they found is in the rats that were given ketamine, the lateral habenula was more suppressed. So our pleasure centers of the brain kind of took over that balance more frequently. So those are just a couple of hypotheses on how ketamine is working. The answer is probably still yet to be found out there.
Yeah. So, the question that I have, because I've never seen the ketamine infusion, I know many of us have not, is do they leave the center the first day, completely just completely out of it? Or is it just kind of, I feel better?
So with our depression patients, we're given 0.5 milligram per kilogram of ketamine over 1 hour. This is a relatively low dose. An average person, it may be 40 milligrams. And that's their first initial infusion where they come in. And when it's spread out over an hour, they're not getting anesthesia effects. They're still awake throughout the ketamine. And look, there's another field of therapy that's ketamine, where patients actually get psychotherapy while the ketamine infusion is going on. That's not something that we do currently, but it's another emerging field of psychiatric care. But back to what I was saying. So the patients, 30 minutes post-infusion, are typically almost completely back to normal and ready to go home with a caregiver with them. But they're walking, they're going to the bathroom, they're speaking perfectly coherently. The most common effect that we're told by patients is that they feel a little lighter than the chair they're in. Almost like they're just floating about a foot or two above their chair, and they can see the room a little bit differently. They're not hallucinating, they just feel a little bit lighter. Anecdotally, we have heavy blankets. I don't know if you've seen those weighted blankets.
Oh, yes.
Our patients love those. We put those on them, and they absolutely love them during their infusions. It helps them to stay grounded to the chair. But back to your question about feeling better. Anecdotally, about 1 in 10 of our patients will feel better after the initial infusion. Again, this is anecdotally, it's not based on literature. Usually, we see a large spike in our patients feeling better around their 3rd or 4th infusion. Again, it's hard to kind of describe what's happening and all the changes that are going on. But anecdotally, we typically see around the 3rd or 4th infusion where our patients start reporting feeling much better from an antidepressant standpoint. We're not really talking about pain. I've kind of focused a little more because they're different treatment protocols. But with the depression, we usually encourage 6 infusions over a 2-week period. And we start on that dose I mentioned, about 0.5 milligram per kilogram. And as they tolerate, we slowly increase it up to sometimes upwards of 1 milligram per kilogram.
That's really interesting. I was just thinking, I was like, wow, I kind of use about 40 to 50 milligrams of ketamine on my cases and, infuse it a lot of the times, but 1 dose is not going to be the game changer, huh? It's multiple doses over an extended period of time. That's interesting.
Typically, that's correct. Yeah, it usually takes multiple doses to kind of get it. However, there's been some interesting studies that have just come out, one on alcohol abuse, where a single dose of ketamine decreases the cravings for alcohol-dependent patients. And so there's just tons of information out there about this. It's amazing to see a drug from the 1960s have so much new and interesting research being done on it.
Yeah, I know some of my colleagues have been peripherally involved in some of the studies related to using low-dose ketamine infusions or coincidental administration of ketamine for reprogramming people's thought processes related to addiction, whether it be alcohol or drugs. I think there's a large gamut here of ongoing research, so keep watching this space. But as I was saying, there's no shortage of literature to read about it.
Yeah. Well, Tracey, tell us a little bit about these outpatient infusion centers. Are we seeing these kind of spread out now all over the country, world? Like, what is the rate of these places opening?
It's growing rapidly. When we started a little over 3 years ago, I think the nearest centers to us were probably 600 to 800 miles away. Most major metropolitan area were just getting 1 or 2 centers at that time. Now, most major metropolitan areas in the U.S. will have 3 or 4, maybe even 5 ketamine infusion centers. The city I'm in, Lafayette, Louisiana, the metropolitan population for the MSA is maybe only 250,000 people. So this is not a highly populous area, but it's growing rapidly. I don't know the data on it because ketamine infusion clinics are not regulated. They don't have to register with anyone in order to open up. So there's no one keeping track of the data. But we've helped at least 20 other centers open up in the United States in the last 2 years by helping them with protocols, policies, procedures, sharing relevant research with them, talking to them about client acquisition, because when you come from the anesthesia world, and a lot of these clinics are being opened by CRNAs, anesthesiologists, while some are being opened by mental health specialists. So you get a bit of a mix of who's owning and opening these clinics. But if you come from the anesthesia world, we've never had to acquire clients. Mm-hmm. Our patients come to us from surgeons who have had to acquire their clients. So it's a bit of a change in mindset of how you operate a business. And we've helped at least 20 open up in the last 2 years.
Wow, that's fantastic. And then just in closing, one of the points that you made in your presentation was like the business case for this, how to best set one up. Is there a place like a repository or somewhere that people can go to find out that information, or what's the best way to get more information about this if it's something that, providers listening would be interested in?
Well, CRNAs, if they're members of the American Association of Nurse Anesthetists, there's actually some good information for members that they have. They have a startup guide, ketamine clinic startup guide. They also have policies type information that they've done with other mental health specialists. I've helped edit and work through some of those with the AANA. So there's a lot of information for CRNAs on the AANA website related to ketamine. We've done this. We've helped other clinics get started as well. There's actually a Ketamine Academy to help with this as well. It's available on the internet. And there's now I'm trying to think of the association, but there's a ketamine association They had their first meeting last year. I believe it was in Denver, if I remember correctly. I could be mistaken. I was unable to go. I was speaking at another engagement at that time. But so there's a lot of information now out there about how to get started. And listen, from my standpoint, I'll always encourage providers to look at this not as a financial move from a business standpoint, but if you're going to get into the ketamine infusion business, make sure you're passionate about it, because you're going to be changing lives. You're going to be helping people in a way that most of us, if you're in the anesthesia world, have never been able to do before. It's so gratifying. It's a completely different experience. But from an economic standpoint, starting a business is risky. Mm-hmm. Yeah, providing anesthesia, you're going to get a paycheck if you work for a hospital. You may not get a paycheck your first several months if you open up a ketamine clinic. So don't do this for financial reasons. It's typically my advice. Do it because you really want to help people and you're passionate about it.
Yeah. That's some great advice. I mean, small businesses like this, the failure rate's so high, and because it is really tough. But if you have an entrepreneurial spirit and you're passionate, it's really interesting prospect for sure.
Congratulations on your work. Very, very complicated space, as you've referred to. So, brave people go there, approach with entrepreneurialism and enthusiasm, but also approach with caution. But as I said, there is a large body of literature and guidelines out there now for people to refer to. It looks like the AANA is there to help people understand if they should get going in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Tracey, thank you so much for joining us and talking to us about this interesting subject that has had a bit of a renaissance. Hopefully we will talk to you again about your work that you're doing and find out more here in the next couple of years to see where it's going and where it's trending. And good luck to everything that you're doing. And congratulations on that entrepreneurial spirit. I'm so glad that we can highlight a CRNA that's stepping beyond the OR and doing some really cool stuff.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to speak with both of you today. And thanks for getting the word out on ketamine.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for listening to Top Med Talk. You can always find us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and at topmedtalk.com. You can get a hold of our podcast. We put out a podcast every day on subjects around the world of perioperative medicine. So check us out for sure. Tracey, thanks again. Monty, we'll see you guys later. Cheers. Bye.
Top Med Talk. Nick Majerison here. Thanks for downloading Top Med Talk. Top Med Talk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. EBPOM has been advocating perioperative medicine for many years now, using the traditional conference circuit, where people have attended meetings from all over the world and heard some of the latest information. However, in the face of the COVID crisis, EBPOM took a bold decision. We've transposed the entire conferencing experience into an online experience. Carbon-friendly conferencing. The latest information, the latest talks, the hottest experts, the most incisive analysis, and even the socialising. We've got it all covered as EBPOM goes virtual. Hot on the heels of the huge success of EBPOM 2020 live from London, we're now headed towards EBPOM Chicago. Come aboard and be part of one of the most exciting developments in medicine since the stethoscope. EBPOM Chicago. Get yourself to ebpom.org now and guarantee yourself a place at one of the most exciting conferences in the world.